Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Historian Crow. Today, here we come with our first video. In terms of long form. I suppose if you have been keeping up with the channels thus far, then you must have seen our lovely collection of short videos relating to cats and the history of cats in different cultures, which was quite interesting. However, today we come to you with a much more, let's say, different approach or a different subject of history, and it is the history. It's more like Middle Eastern history, and it's which is much more conventional. Well, when we come to the Middle East, we know that the Middle East is quite ancient part of this world where many different civilization empires have developed and declined, from the empires of Egypt to the city-states of Sumer, the Akkadian empires, the multiple Babylonian and Assyrian empires, and the Hittites and the Mycenaean Greeks. And thus we see this diverse collection of civilizations and cultures all embedded in a single place. Of course, that is not to say that the rest of the world was absent from civilization. Of course, we can never forget the Indus Valley civilizations as well as the Yellow River civilization, the Chin states, and of course the Andean civilization and the Mesoamerican civilizations. However, I chose today to kind of go to a midpoint in Middle Eastern civilizations. Around in the turn of the first millennium BCE, which would be like the transition after the Bronze Age collapse that we have seen earlier, and more of a focus to the rise of what we would now know as some sort of global empires. Of course, by that time, the scale of globalism, which much smaller than what we would perceive now. When we would discuss global empires today, we would love to think about the British Empire, the Mongol Empire, or the Russian Empire. However, back then, during the ancient period, a global empire would uh, involve a much smaller area. As a matter of fact, empires or states at those times did not typically exceed the 1 million square kilometer area, which of course many countries do nowadays. But back then, the idea of a united crown or kingdom to be that large, withholding that much diversity of people, was really unheard of, as the norm was basically urbanized city states and confederation of tribes. And of course, you had the smaller exceptions like the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian kingdoms, which were a bit larger than usual, but still not much larger, and the deviation wasn't much. Now, as we can see here in front of us is the Neo-Assyrian Empire. It's actually one of the third iteration of Assyrian hegemony or dominance in the Middle East, and it's in this iteration or iteration, depending on how you want to pronounce it, we actually see the peak of Assyrian power, as they actually go much farther than they have ever done before. And we see here as they would reach the Egyptian kingdom, the Levant, the center of Anatolia, and of course most of Mesopotamia and Urartu, which corresponds to the historical lands of Armenia. And really, a state with that size and the diversity of people was really unheard of. And it was also during that time that we also get the first burning of the temple of Jerusalem, which was quite a devastating event in Jewish history. But so the Neo-Assyrians, they were quite militaristic and expansionist, and they were known to extract much tribute from the people that they ruled over, and really the dominance was quite known. And actually, this dominance of them is what inspired, uh, one could argue, is the what led for the downfall. But really, in the end, every empire is bound to fall in one day or another. But in the case of the Assyrians, it would be quite an epic fall, or like quite an epic grand fall. For we would see that new dynasty would come to surpass them and fight them. Of course, not alone, it would be through an alliance. However, we start our journey here for this interesting prequel to the epic that I'm foreshadowing. We see from a group of nomadic Iranic tribes that it was really speculated that they came from the northern Caucasus or northern Asia, from next to the Caspian, were the Medes. Now the Medes, they were quite nomadic, and actually the Assyrians did not pay much attention to them initially, and they were seen as some sort of barbarians or some sort of people that were to be extracted tribute from. And we do see that Medes, after many years, because as we can see that the Assyrian Empire was quite large already by the time of the 9th century, 7th century, and 8th century, they were quite huge, and that during that time they were like troubling the Medes, and it would take with a man named Dahyuku. He would be the first Median ruler. Of course, when you go back that much in history, you kind of have like this semi-legendary statuses to the historical figures that we deal with, and which makes it a bit like this character, for example, might not have existed at all. However, of course, there is some truth to it, and he was actually the one that is attributed for founding Ekbatana, or modern day Hamadan, in Iran, and it means the gathering place, as kind of like a center to the Medes, nomadic tribes, as a way to unify the Medes into a single kingdom or state. Now his son and successor, hold on with me, Faravartish, he would try to continue his father's effort in fostering independence. However, unfortunately, he would fall in battle against the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and they would soon return to suzerainty. They would soon return to be under the control of the Neo-Assyrians, as well as being influenced also by the Scythians. The Scythians were also another group of nomadic Iranians, but they were quite powerful and they were quite troublesome for the Neo-Assyrians and also the Scythians. Now we come to our champion. Now bear with me. Yukshtara, Yukshtara, who was actually responsible for establishing the Median Kingdom, or by the end of his reign, what could be labeled as the Median Empire, as a global power of sorts, as he would end up allying with the Neo-Babylonians and the Kingdom of Lydia to fight off the Neo-Assyrians and actually sack their capital and end their rule. And the Medes would be taking up the bulk of the Neo-Assyrian Empire's state, as they would inherit this global empire that the Neo-Assyrians had forged up until now, and even extended further, penetrating deeper into Anatolia. And it's said that they also incorporated Parthia, which we can see here corresponds to northeastern Iran and southern western Turkmenistan. Now, of course, the extension to Afghanistan and the extension to Pakistan here, like in terms of Gedrosia and Arya and Varangiana, this is all speculative. We actually are unsure if the Medes would have went that far east, but we know that they had much influence. but that influence was scarce as there's not much archaeological evidence to support such a huge state. But we know for sure it opened the gateway to the empire that would succeed them later on, and that would prove to be much more famous to them than them in the minds of the modern day human, I guess, when they look and romanticize ancient history. Now, of course, with an alliance that would continue between the Neo-Babylonians and the Kingdom of Lydia, they'd even intermarry from each other, thus that the kings of the Medes and the kings of Babylon and the kings of Lydia would nickname themselves or would be brother-in-laws towards each other. I would also love to note that actually most of the sources for what has transpired during that time comes from the father of history, Herodotus, the Greek. And this is actually why, if you would look at the names that I've gathered here for the Median kings, they would look quite confusing, as I have tried my best to try to find the Persian versions of the names rather than using the Greek names or the Hellenized names that Herodotus has used himself. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it for the successor of Yokshtara, whose name is Astyages, who I believe probably has his own Persified, or actually not Persified, because his original name would be closer to the Persian one than the Hellenized one. I unfortunately couldn't find it, but Astyages would be the last king of the Medes. Actually, little is known about him, and most of the stories that we get to know from Astyages are ones of romanticized tales, either portraying him in a much more negative picture as a cruel ruler, as in the eyes of Herodotus, or as a more of a benevolent, wise man who would take care of his grandson, who's actually very famous, but I would discuss later on, as it was narrated by Xenophon, who was also Greek, an Athenian Greek, but who was a great ally of the Persians. Now, Astyages, he would bear a daughter her name is Mandana, and she actually, she's quite an interesting character because she would marry, well, she was said to marry an Persian king later on. Now, of course, this might not seem relevant, but the offspring of their marriage would be quite an influential man that I aim to cover later on in the second part of this video. However, here I just wish to introduce one of the first influential global empires, as I would call this the age of globalism after the first millennium BCE. I wanted to introduce the first two empires during that time, the Neo-Assyrians and the Medes, which of course forged this huge global diverse empire that included the Levant, Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, Anatolia, and even Egypt. And now, of course, with the coming of the Medes, it was started to include, well, Media, Elam, Persis, and Parthia. And of course, something, a state or a kingdom unifying all these people, it's actually something quite inspiring and beautiful to see such diversity. It would actually, as we've seen here, it would have been only through this diverse alliance and the meeting of interest between the Medes and the Babylonians and the Lydians that they were able to conquer the mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire. And I suppose that was our first video, and we thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, and I cannot wait to see how the story transpires as we see the successes of the Medes, the Achaemenids, or the Persians as we know them nowadays, as we see the grandson of Astyages, who is the famous Cyrus II, or Cyrus the Great, or Kurush. Thank you very much and have a good day.